Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Rebecca, otherwise known as Hypnot Hooray Online, and today I wanted to share a little bit about my thoughts for keeping a yarn stash, my plans for low buy year in 2024, and a little reorganization of my current yarn stash. So if this is interesting to you, keep on watching. So this video stemmed from my knitting intention for this year to have a low buy year and use more yarn from stash. I'm at a little bit of a lower angle today because I wanted to show a little bit more of my yarn stash. But as I've mentioned in previous videos, I do enjoy keeping a yarn stash because using yarn, or I guess purchasing yarn, it's not really about purchasing, but bringing in new yarn into my stash and getting excited about what's the possibility that it could become is a big part of my making process. I usually have yarn that I bring into my home and I think about the perfect project I have for it before I cast on, and that's something that I really enjoy doing. I know that stash is a really personal topic, and so this isn't me saying what's right or wrong, but that's personally my approach to making, and that's why I enjoy keeping a stash. However, I will say that my yarn stash has grown quite a bit, and I just have to acknowledge that my making does not keep up with how much yarn that I have. So the input doesn't really match the output. And so this year I really want to be more intentional about bringing more yarn into my home, into my stash, and thinking about why I actually use the yarn that I do. So yes, I just want to be more aware of that, and I wanted to share how I'm going to be approaching a low buy year for my making in 2024. So let's get into the reasoning. So I have some notes here on my iPad, so I'm going to be referencing down below. But the first reason that I'm going to be embarking on a low buy year is space. So I live in a 1-bedroom apartment, and when my boyfriend and I moved in, we decided we were going to create a hobby corner. I explained this in my first podcast episode because that was kind of the context for the background that we have. I really like knitting and fiber and yarn, so this side is my hobby corner, and then he really likes reading, so that's why we have the books in the middle. Those are not my books, but those are his books. So the hobby corner does bring me a lot of joy, and I really enjoy seeing the yarn here. Like as soon as I wake up or when I go to sleep, I can just stare out and see the yarn that I have. But I really want to contain it to this space, and I think that this is more than enough to have, so I just want to contain it to this corner here, and it has grown a little bit more than this, so I just want to limit and use up what I have so it can stay in this general area. The second reason is I would say generally my color and fiber preferences have changed or are beginning to change. I wouldn't say like color. I definitely lean towards certain colors that I wear in everyday life, like colors that I think really suit me well, like the navies, grays, off-whites, greens. So I do knit for a lot of things with those colors, but I would say just in general, there are things that do change. Like there are trendy colors that come up in knitting, and then I may purchase some yarn in that color. But if I don't knit it right away, if I did get sucked into that trend and I end up not liking that color in the future, it is something that's still in stash, and it's something that I feel guilty if I don't end up using. So I will say that I want to limit stash it in that way, where I want to purchase less about color trends, I guess, and more about colors that I think will suit me well. If colors do bring me joy and I want to knit from them right away, then that's great, but I just don't want to keep them in stash for so long, because I think when it comes to trendy colors, if I don't cast it on right away, they end up just staying in stash. Those like brighter pops of color or things that I don't usually use. So I just want to be more aware of that. In terms of fiber preferences, I realized that I am not much of a summer knitter. Like I do like knitting summer tanks. I feel like they're a great way to experiment with new techniques, but I do have a decent amount of summer fibers that I don't know if I'm ever going to use, and that was something that I had thought I was going to do more at the beginning of my knitting journey. And so I do have some remnants of like cotton yarn, or I guess more summer-based, plant-based fibers that I probably wouldn't use in the future now going forward. So that's another reason why. The third reason is my project preferences have changed. So I guess I'll maybe explain this one a little bit more, because I love knitting sweaters and I've always loved knitting sweaters. But when I purchase yarn at the beginning, as I mentioned, I'll purchase it and then think about the perfect project. I kind of have to estimate how much yarn I'm going to need for a project. So for example, like if I were to knit a heavy DK light worsted weight sweater, I would roughly need like around 1,000 meters or 1,100 meters for my size. If I wanted to knit something at a fingering weight, I would roughly gauge around like 1,200 to 1,400 meters, but I have to estimate. And so for example, I'll bring in a worsted weight yarn around 1,000 meters. I really like the color, it'll be in my stash, but then moving forward, I'm kind of limited to only picking projects that are going to suit that yarn estimate or yarn consumption. So it does kind of limit me in the future. And as my project preferences change, and if I don't have enough yarn, then dye lots might change, and I can't get the yarn anymore, it's been discontinued, it's harder to get here in Canada now. So then I'm kind of limited, or the opposite can happen where I purchase a lot of yarn. Like let's say I purchased 1,500 meters of fingering weight yarn, and I think that that yarn would work really well for a project that let's say only uses 1,000. Then I'll be less incentivized to cast it on, because I'll have around 500 meters left, and I don't really want to have all of that yarn in scrap yarn at the end to use for some other project that I have to think of in the future. So that's why I really want to focus on buying less and using up the sweater quantities or larger project quantities that I already have in stash, because I do feel like my preferences have changed over time. I prefer using fingering or light DK weight gauge projects and more cabled knits or structured knits, so it uses more yarn than just stockinette, which is what I was kind of envisioning for the project at the beginning. And since these knits require more yarn, I'm always running into yarn chicken issues. And as you've seen in my podcast, it's not something new. I do play yarn chicken quite a bit, and that has resulted in me A, not being able to cast on the project, or B, ending up with something pretty cropped. So that's something that I want to avoid more in the future. And another reason is just frankly like overconsumption. And there are obviously like macro factors that influence why we make purchases. I feel like we're being influenced a lot through social media. I'm guilty of that. I also like produce and share my projects online too, which I think kind of contribute to that like capitalist wheel. But that being said, it's just something that I want to be more aware of. Like I have purchased so much yarn over the past 4 years since I started knitting, or just being introduced to like fiber arts, because I started crocheting before, that I've just purchased so much that if I keep purchasing at this rate, I will never use up what I already have. And as you'll see later on, while I reorganize my stash, you'll see that I've purchased like more than enough yarn than one person needs. It is just, that's the fact of what has happened, the current reality. I have a decent amount of yarn, and this video is me wanting to tackle it, journal it, document it, so I can look back in the future, and maybe if others are interested in also limiting their stash or starting on the slow buy year, us chatting about this together, me right now and maybe you in the comments, we can start on this together and really motivate ourselves. So that's kind of the reason why I want to be filming this video, but I feel like I've gone on a bit of a tangent from that reasoning. So yeah, just in general, overconsumption. And the next reason is just generally trying to save money. I am fortunate enough where I have like some expendable income at the end of the month to be able to spend on hobbies. Like I know not everyone is in that position. And so I feel very like fortunate to be able to have that yarn money or like hobby money left over at the end of the month to make a purchase if I want to, but that doesn't mean that I have to. And so me starting on this low buy year is also a way for me to save money for either other things that are not related to fiber arts, but also for maybe like larger, bigger ticket items that I may want in the future. Like if I do want to splurge a little bit more on like a cashmere yarn in the future, or something that I'm thinking about is possibly like a Chaogu interchangeable needle set. So even though I do have that money allocated in my budget, I do like line by line budgeting every year on an Excel spreadsheet for myself, just to keep myself on track with spending. I always set aside a little bit of money, or I create a buffer for spending on my hobby, but it doesn't mean I have to spend that every month. And that's something that I really want to be aware of this year, that I'm not spending that allocated amount. It can go towards savings, and hopefully that in the future, when I do want to make bigger ticket items or just in general want to save money, that will be realized through this low buy year. And the last reason that I want to start this low buy year is I just want to remove the guilt that I'm starting to feel when I acquire yarn. Before I used to get really excited whenever I would bring yarn into my stash and just think about the possibilities. And I still have that feeling now, but I also have this feeling of guilt, like, oh, this is another sweater's quantity that I have to use up, or like, this is going to have to be A, B, or C, otherwise I'll never use it. And I feel like that's not something that I should be feeling when I am thinking about yarn, and it's something that I want to, I guess, stay positive about or be really happy about. At the end of the day, this is my hobby, so the fact that I'm feeling guilt or stress is probably not a good thing. And so yeah, by having this low buy year, hopefully I'm going to remove that guilt in the future, and do intend to go to a yarn and fiber festival this year. So by limiting how much yarn I bring into my stash this year, it will allow me to have a bit more freedom, or like more of a sense of freedom, going to Knit City hopefully in the spring, and maybe making a few purchases and not feeling that guilt when I come home. So in terms of how I'm going to be approaching a low buy year, this is something that I've talked about extensively with my friend Tar of Tar Knits, and we decided to gamify our low buy intentions. This is not something that, again, I want to impose on others, but I just thought it was really fun, and it's pretty effective for me so far. So yeah, I just thought it was interesting to share. So I have some of those gamified rules of how we intend to use our stash, and then I've added a few others for myself. The first is the low buy is going to last for a period of 6 months until May, which is when Knit City is coming to Toronto, but I want to have it last till the end of the year, but we'll just have it last until then and then kind of reevaluate. So it's going to last 6 months. The second rule I have for myself is no test knits unless I already have the yarn and it's something that I'm interested in. This was a new year intention that I had, and it's definitely something that I want to stick to for this low buy. The third is no starting projects unless majority of the required yarn is already in stash. So for example, I may already have like some wool in let's say like a fuchsia color, which I do in my stash, and I intend to hold it with a strand of mohair, but I don't have the mohair on hand right now. And so part of this low buy year is I won't purchase that mohair quantity. That fuchsia yarn will just become a little bit lower down in my priority to use until I've used up yarn that is ready to be cast on into projects. So I could purchase yarn if I need to finish a project and I run out, like let's say I lost at a game of Yarn Chicken, I'll allow that for myself. But in terms of purchasing like a whole other amount that I need for a sweater's quantity or a larger garment quantity, I'm not allowing myself to do that. The fourth is no restrictions on purchasing knitting patterns, because I do want to get excited about the yarn that I already have in stash, and that can come from finding new patterns that inspire me. So I don't want to place any conditions on knitting patterns, but I will say that I do want to prioritize knitting from patterns that I already have in my pattern library. The next thing I'll be doing is tracking my yarn consumption on a spreadsheet. Like I said, I already do this line by line budgeting for my everyday spending already, so I'm going to be applying it to my yarn stash. I kind of started this late last year, and it was really helpful, but like I said, I wasn't really sticking to a low buy year or like really trying to limit bringing things into my yarn stash, so it wasn't that effective. Like, I noted what it was, but I didn't really reflect on it, I guess, at the end of the month. But this year I'm going to be noting the yarn that I bring into my stash, the yarn that I bring out, or the yarn that I use, what is the net negative, and just reflect a little bit more about my usage each month. The next is to unsubscribe from yarn store and website promotional emails, and also Facebook Marketplace notifications. This is a rule that seems so obvious and it probably is. Like, it seems almost silly that I'm making this rule for myself, but yarn sales really do tend to get me. I do have a bit of that like FOMO mindset. If I don't purchase something in the moment, then it will never be on sale again. But the reality is yarn stores always have sales. There are like cycles of sales each year. And so by not purchasing right now, it doesn't mean that I'm not going to be ever able to purchase in the future, but that's not something that I think about in the moment when I see that there's like a good deal on some yarn that I want. So yeah, I'm gonna just unsubscribe, so it'll be out of sight, out of mind. I won't see it. Same with Facebook Marketplace. I really like using Facebook Marketplace. It's something that I almost check like on the daily. It's part of my daily scrolling routine on social media. And I've gotten some pretty good finds on Facebook Marketplace of some special yarn. But yeah, I just need to block myself from seeing that because I'm always going to be tempted by like a good deal. Okay, so those were my general rules. In terms of how we intend to gamify this, so Tara and I decided that we are going to still be able to purchase yarn, but have a like 2 steps forward, 3 steps forward, 1 step back kind of approach. And I think that that's so far been working really well for me. So for this, I'm going to be referring to it as sweaters quantity and accessory quantity, but really in general, it just means like larger projects and then smaller projects, whatever they may be. So for this low buy period, I will knit 2 sweaters quantities before I have the option to purchase 1 sweaters quantity, and then I will knit 3 accessories before having the option to purchase 1 accessory quantity. And that doesn't mean that I will be purchasing, but it's just I have the option to. So I know for a fact before I make any purchases that it will be net negative because I'm using more than I'm bringing into my stash. The second is I'm going to create a general yarn use challenge for this year. I saw that there was one from Rachel is Knitting last year in 2023. A goal that she had was to use 2,023 grams of yarn in 2023, and I don't know if this is going to be that effective for me. I don't know if it's going to motivate me or unmotivate me throughout this process, but I am like a pretty goal-oriented person, so I wanted to set like an objective amount of yarn that I want to use this year in addition to that gamification. So in 2024, I want to use at least 50 skeins of yarn, or 2,500 grams of yarn, or 8,750 meters. This is based off of a rough calculation of yarn consumption in 2023 and what I was able to achieve. So yeah, I don't really know, like there's not an exact science to how I calculated that, but roughly this is how much I want to use this year. And hopefully at the end of the year, I can revisit this and see if I was successful or not. And hopefully, I think this is pretty attainable. Hopefully I achieved this goal. So those were all of my rules and how I'm going to be approaching a low buy year. So let's get into my yarn stash and reorganization. I do want to say though, I am kind of exposing myself by sharing this stash or being like vulnerable, I guess, by sharing what I have, because it is something that I am getting like a bit self-conscious about. But I thought maybe it could be interesting if you wanted to see how I store yarn in a smaller apartment, and also just I want to use this opportunity to document what I have at the beginning of the year and look back at it at the end of the year. I just really want to see what my baseline is, so that's why I'm sharing today. But yarn is a very personal topic, so please do what works best for you, and please keep the negative comments to a minimum. I always appreciate feedback, but yeah, I'd appreciate if there weren't any super mean comments down below after I share. So this is my yarn stash behind me. My yarn is organized in 3 different sections. I have this yarn cart here, which is what was my first purchase I made for my stash. And then it kind of grew from there. But I first purchased this cart here. So I store my yarn on this. The second area that I store my yarn are these collapsible crates. I got these crates from Indigo, which is a bookstore or like lifestyle store in Canada. And they have these collapsible crates in a set of 3. I think they were around $25 for 3 of them. There were different shades that you could pick from. So yeah, I just have 3 of them, and I store my yarn in these. And what you can't see in my videos is the third place that I store yarn is, I'll just take the camera here and show you, is up there. You can see that's where the teddy pillow is that I intend to frog. But I also keep yarn in those, boxes as well. It tends to be yarn that's like in the off season. So up there is a lot of my summer yarns. And other like miscellaneous sweater quantities that I have. So those are the 3 areas that I have. My goal at the end of this low buy year is for my yarn to just fit on these 3 collapsible crates, and then also this cart right here. So that's my goal, is to eliminate what's being stored up there and to have these bins not be so overflowing. So I'm thinking what I'll do right now is I will dump all the yarn that I have right now on the floor, do a little bit of a time-lapse reorganization and cleanup, and then go over how I am storing everything and what's my thought process for why I'm keeping things where they are. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that little time lapse of me organizing everything, and let's turn the camera around and show how I organize things in my hobby corner. Okay, so like I said, I do try to keep my yarn contained in this corner of my apartment. So I have the collapsible crates right here, and then the cart, and then over there is where I store all of my finished knits, and then my scrap yarn are in these 2 little buckets right here. So this is yarn that I intend to cast on in the next weeks or months. Basically the yarn that I want to use soon. So this brown yarn, I want it to become a Sophie sweater by Paula Streaked. The orange is the Aura top by Rhodes Knitwear. This blue will possibly become the Couture Wrap cardigan by Sari Nordlin. This beige is what I already have in my sweater number 14 v-neck. The Drops Air in Wheat is for the Lonely Leftovers vest. The gray might become the Couture Wrap cardigan. I don't really know. If not, it'll be the Clematis sweater. I haven't decided the colors yet. And then underneath I have this brown wool that I got from my grandma. I'm not really sure what it is, but I don't know what brand, but I know it's 100% wool. That may become a champagne cardigan. I have some gray yarns here, just some single skeins. This was Drops Fibre, and then Knit Picks Stroll with some mohair. I intend to make a pair of penny gloves for some friends. This blue yarn here is Knit Picks Aloft in the shade Celeste, is the blue that I want to use for my spot sweater, which was a colorwork sweater that I want to make this year. This brown yarn is onling number 11, which is a yarn that I intend to use for a pie camisole. So this cart is kind of upcoming whips or just yarn that I am really inspired by at the moment. Then we move on over to the crates. So I don't know if you'll be able to tell, but I tried to organize them by color. So we have up here all of my white or cream colored yarns. So I have my Knit Picks Wool of the Andes. I'm not going to go into every single yarn here because that would just be a bit much, but yeah, this is my off-white shade. I have some mohair here. This is some cotton yarn that I have for some dishcloths. Then we go into, this is kind of all of my warm tone colors, but it's a very big mismatch. I feel like this probably shouldn't be here. Now that I'm looking at it, it should probably be down here in the blues. But this is all of my warm tone shades. So leftover from my Minto sweater, the red drops that I intend to use for sweater number 20, some Noro yarn, some of the Letlopi that I got from a friend that went to Iceland and got this for me. Really cool yarn. I got this wool yarn from Romney, and some of my hanks are over there of sock yarn. So that is my warm toned basket or crate, and then down here are all my cool tone ones. So this is the leftover yarn that I got from the Aspen sweater test knit. So that's still in hank form. I have this green, which I mentioned in my knitting intentions video, that's the green for my sweater number 15 actually. So there's some partial balls at the back there. And then underneath I have the Cascade 220 superwash merino yarn, I believe it is, or just Cascade 220 wool, which I think might become another Marseille sweater, some navy mohair. So all of my blue yarn here. Okay, and as I mentioned, I had these not very aesthetic shoe boxes from IKEA that I used to hold my non-seasonal yarn. So in here I'll have most of my summer yarn and some miscellaneous sweaters quantities. And like I said, by the end of the year, I do not want any yarn in these baskets, and I want to just contain everything in these crates and my cart here. So hopefully I will have used enough yarn so these crates are no longer, or these boxes are no longer, and I can use them for something else in my apartment. Probably what they're intended to be used for, which is shoes. So yeah, I have some summer yarn here. And I don't really have a problem with moths, but I just don't want too much dust accumulating on the yarn. So I do tend to store the yarn together in Ziploc bags. So I'll try not to rustle it around too much so it's not so noisy. But I have some summer yarn in here, some Knit Picks Aloft, some black cozy wool merino back there. This is yarn that my boyfriend's parents got me in Germany, which I really love. So this one is more of my cool tones again, and then in here I have more of those warm tones. So some cotton yarn here that I got, I think from Facebook Marketplace a while ago. Some more cotton yarn there. A sweater's quantity of wool of the Andes with mohair. Some more summer yarn in this one. This yarn I got from Retrosaria Pomar in Portugal. The Knit Picks Aloft and palette that I got in the shade Tarragon, and another sweater's quantity of mohair here.
So that's everything in this bin. And hopefully by the end of the year, I won't be using the yarn specifically in these bins, but yes, I will have used enough in my entire stash collectively, so these bins are no longer. And the last thing in my hobby corner is, these are the crates again. At the very bottom, this is where I keep my knitting books. I have another sweaters quantity right there. They were already packaged like that, so they are just tucked in there. But another sweaters quantity of Patton's wool. And then I keep my scrap yarn in these drawstring bags, and I just keep them on either side. These I purchased from Target. We don't have Target in Canada, but when I went to New York, I saw these in the Target there, and I thought that they would work really well for project bags, but they've since become the yarn bags that I use for scrap yarn. So again, as you can see, I like organizing things by color. So this is all of my scrap yarn that is a bright color. So the fun pops of color are in here. And then this is my neutral bag of scrap yarn. I pulled from these a lot when I was knitting ornaments, but since then I haven't really done a big scrappy yarn project. So I think there's a decent amount where I could definitely do that, or maybe just pick from here whenever I want to do smaller accessories. But yeah, I have them organized by color. And then over here, this is where I store my finished knits. I don't intend to declutter this or reorganize this just yet, but I know eventually I'm going to have to once I knit some more things. There are already a few things that I've knit that are not in this shelf here. I didn't take everything from my parents' house, so there are a decent amount of knits that I have there as well. But these are the ones that I use frequently, and they're on this shelf here.
So I hope you enjoyed watching me reorganize my yarn stash, and I feel like I maybe wasn't the most articulate in this video with sharing my thoughts about the low buy, but I thought, you know what, I really want to document it at the beginning of the year. So let me know down below if you also intend to use more from your yarn stash or embark on a low buy year. I think it'd be really motivating if there were more of us in this together, so we can yeah, keep each other on track. And I just think it's more exciting if there's others that want to join in with me. So hopefully by the end of this year, the yarn stash looks a little bit different and I have used more from stash. And I don't want to say that that's the only point. Like, I'm not using the yarn just for the sake of using up yarn, because I do really like the yarn that I have now. I'm gonna enjoy all the projects, but how I'm framing it for myself is I want my knitting output to focus more on my knitting output rather than my input. All right, I think that's enough rambling, so I will see you in my next video.